Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting. Whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through the incredible content of our Facebook page. I was sorry to miss last week's IANDS conference in Phoenix, despite the 100-degree temperatures out there. Early on, I'd thought about applying to give a talk, and the annual conference is always a great opportunity to find guests for the future shows on NDE Radio. But anyway, it reminded me of a talk I delivered at the California IANDS conference some 10 years ago, which still rings true to me, so I thought I'd represent it for this week's show for any of you who might also have missed the conference. I titled it, "We're All Bozos on This Bus," but there are bodhisattvas aboard as well. "We're All Bozos on This Bus" was the title of an album released in 1971 by California's radio comedy team, Firesign Theater. And while I was trying to arrange a bus ticket for one of my crazier church members the other day, the title and the idea came back, quote, like the hot kiss at the end of a wet fist, to use one of Firesign's more memorable punchlines. How many of you believe in reincarnation? There's overwhelming evidence for the concept of reincarnation, from the stories that come out of hypnotic regression to children's waking memories of previous lives. So the question has to be asked, if going into the light is so awesome, so magnificent the embodiment of eternal love, then what are we doing back here on Earth? Are we crazy? I think the answer has to be yes. We must be crazy to leave the light and return to life on Earth. We're like children who have run away from a loving home to join the circus. We're all bozos on this bus. And then I remembered a story I'd heard on a bus. It was from a man named Chris as we returned on a bus to the airport from the IANDS convention in Denver a few years back. He said he had died and found himself merging into the light of God. It was amazing. But as he felt himself being drawn in, he said, "When the light reached my genitals, I had a moment's doubt. God," he said, "I'm only 20 years old." Instantly, he was separated again and found himself in a kind of waiting room, waiting to go back into his body. By the time we talked, he was a nurse practitioner providing desperately needed medical care in some remote part of Alaska, doing God's work. Was he crazy for rejecting the merge with God? Well, not as crazy as some, perhaps, but crazy nonetheless. Stories of separation from the light we humans tell ourselves begin, I guess, with Lucifer and the fallen angels who supposedly ego-tripped their way from heaven to earth. Was it Lucifer's pride, injured by the creation of humans, or a desire to be like God, that caused that fall? Another one of my church congregation believes we are all fallen angels trying to earn our way back into heaven. The early fathers of the Christian church assumed that the fallen angels became the pagan gods, Jupiter and Apollo, Athena, Isis, and the like, who bred with humans to produce the semi-divine offspring of Egyptian and Greek mythology the Bible calls the Nephilim, the hero giants of old in Genesis. The key separation from God story in our Judeo-Christian library is that of Adam and Eve, who walked with God in the Garden of Eden until the serpent tempted the couple to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We see them as blissfully happy beings who chose to do the one thing God tells them they must not do, since it will bring separation from love. So an angel drives them out of the garden, away from the tree of eternal life, so that they will not exist as both immortal and fallen. They're forced to join the rest of the world, already in progress, outside of the hedged protection of Eden, where they had been clothed in the grace of God. A similar story is told of Gautama Buddha, Siddhartha, who was raised in a palatial setting without any evidence of poverty, sickness, old age, or death. Everything was designed to bring the young prince every comfort and pleasure, and to shield him from every problem and pain of existence. And when he left the protection of the palace and saw for himself the suffering of the world, He declared this existence in the world to be a cruel illusion. And then there's the story of Jesus, who many believe was a co-equal part of the light that separated itself from the eternal to manifest as a man to save mankind from this dark world's addiction to self-destruction. Christians believe his death on the cross made possible humanity's reconnection with the light. That is, those souls who had died before his sacrifice could now be led into the light by Christ. And all who followed could go there as well, free will permitting, of course. The Adam Buddha story is the first half of the hero's journey tale, the loss of paradise and the subsequent recognition of the illusory nature of desire and striving in this life on earth. The second half of the story, the Jesus story, is the hero who sacrifices himself to reconnect mankind with the light, the true light from which we came. And that story gets told over and over again. It's the third part of the Matrix movies where Neo offers himself to the machine to make peace. It's the theme of the new movie The Giver, where the hero carries a baby and the collective memories and guilt of humanity on a journey across the boundary of death to our eternal home so that people can feel again. It's a collective action that opens the hearts of those left behind who had forgotten how to love. With the establishment of the Western Church, Christians formally rejected the notion of reincarnation. After all, now that the gates of heaven were open, why would a soul voluntarily separate itself from God to return to this place of suffering? You'd have to be crazy, right? And yet, here we are again, all bozos on this bus. Now, traditional believers in reincarnation would not call us crazy for wanting to come back, just unenlightened. They argue we return to improve our chances for enlightenment in order to achieve paradise. But since NDEs demonstrate paradise is already available to us, isn't our being here just an excuse to indulge our passions for the game? I call the simulated stimulation of life on Earth a game because it's very much equivalent to the addictions many of us develop for computer games where our avatars strive for success in war or sex, money or power, or are driven by the allure of the technology itself. For example, along with the inspirational film version of Heaven is for Real is a film titled Enter the Void. It's about how a low-life drug addict who never even looks for the light after he dies of an overdose simply starts scouting for couples having sex so he can be born again. There's an addiction to life on this planet that we must take into account when we discuss our yearning for the love of God. Like the villain Cypher in the Matrix movies, we may sell out the truth just because we yearn for that tasty morsel of steak our fantasy world seems to offer. Like Eve and the apple, the serpent can lure us with steak as well. In the room where I take my morning shower hangs a print of an Edward Hicks Peaceable Kingdom. It serves to remind me each day where the garden is and where I am not. Edward Hicks, 1780 to 1849, was a Pennsylvania Quaker, which means a minister in the Society of Friends, whose skills at painting wagons, tavern signs, and eventually canvas conflicted with the plain living lifestyles of the Quaker faith. Yet he became one of the most honored of Quakers because he embodied in the 61 renditions of his Peaceable Kingdom paintings the values and yearnings of Quaker faith. That place described in Isaiah 11 where the wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. Hicks discovered a style later embraced by children's books illustrators, which established the Big Eyes approach to grabbing the viewer's attention. We, and children more than others, know eyes are windows to the soul, or as Quakers might say, to the divine spark within. The Quaker form of silent worship, broken only when the divine spark is moved to speak, makes ministers of us all. Hicks was no doubt empowered by the Quaker belief in an inner light. Each of us has been given to guide us and remind us of our own divine nature. Cultivating our own inner light begins to harmonize us with the inner light of others and with the great light of the Spirit that waits to collect us into the hereafter. In my Peaceable Kingdom print, Hicks portrays Quakers and Indians meeting in friendship on the banks of the river, while in the wooded meadow the lion and the lamb, the bear and the cow, both the predators and the vulnerable, lie down together in peace, sharing straw for food instead of eating one another. There is something else going on here, however, that makes this more than an earthly experience. For while the adults on the beach seem to be working out the politics of peace, the children and the animals in the foreground are looking at us, looking at them, and staring through us as well. It's as if the great light stands behind us, the viewers, illuminating and empowering everything. The Quakers, the Indians, and even us admiring the painting are unaware of the great love that lights us from behind, but the animals and the children gazing out, they know. Interestingly enough, this scene resembles to some extent the visions described by those whose near-death experience brings them to a lovely meadow where deceased loved ones and even deceased pets gather to greet the one who has died. When told they must go back, most mourn leaving the love and peace they've witnessed in this place. Who knows, perhaps Edward Hicks himself survived a near-death experience that inspired his obsession with this scene. Or perhaps it represents a shared memory, a vision our inner light preserves of where we come from and where we will return. Before I flip to the we're all bozos on this bus, I titled this talk, Healing the World. So we must diagnose what ails us in the first place. What ails us primarily are the lies we tell ourselves about the nature of truth. We learn to lie early in our lives. Remember, where did you go out? What did you do? Nothing. We lie by omission and by commission, and we do it so often we don't even recognize it when it happens, by us or to us. But the lies we tell each other about the nature of truth are the worst of all. Mankind, early on, developed two major disciplines dedicated to the pursuit of truth: religion and science. They were designed to come at truth from both ends of the telescope. Religion would seek truth by trying to see the big picture, God, and how that truth explained everything in heaven and on earth. Meanwhile, science would examine the particular, and from those observations extrapolate a handle on the truth a bit at a time. From the beginning, the two ways of thinking were at each other's throats. Well, take Adam and Eve, for example. Their faith said, obey God. But scientific inquiry said, well, let's just experiment with this forbidden fruit thing. We might learn something from it. But as we know, there's even more corruption to it than that early example. Our capacity to lie, coupled with our desire for that tasty bite of steak, has corrupted the pursuit of truth by both science and religion on a massive scale. For the last several years, I've served as a chaplain at a major hospital in Maine. Before that, I was ordained a congregational minister. Before that, a seminary graduate with a Doctor of Ministry degree. Before that, many years as a practicing Quaker. Before that, a student minoring in Eastern Religion Studies at Columbia University. Before that, a kid in Catholic Sunday School. And before that, a childhood near-death experiencer. My mother liked to tell the story that I was born in a Salvation Army hospital where a sign painted on the ceiling above the delivery table read, Jesus saves. The thing that keeps me questioning much of my religious training is my NDE story. When I was about 7.5, I waded too far into a lake. The slope fell off sharply, and I slipped off the edge into deep water. I came up once, let out a scream that emptied my lungs, and then descended slowly to the bottom. When my lungs filled with water, my soul left my body, went into a nearby birch tree, where I could see my mother running down to the shore to jump in, dive down, find me, and pull me up. She dragged me to the shore, threw me face down with a log under my chest, and pushed on my back to try to get the water out of my lungs. In the process, she more or less invented CPR, since the log did chest compressions each time she pushed. No angel was there to tell me. I just knew I had to go back into my body. Now there's a dream, or a series of dreams, connected to this story. For years afterward, while growing up, I had this recurring dream that I was falling away from the light down a dark tunnel. I thought it was a memory of my sinking to the bottom of the lake, that the light was the sun on the water and the dark was too deep for the light. Years later, as an adult in my 20s, I returned to the lake and dove down just to see if my dream reflected the reality of sunlight underwater. It did not. The sunlight spread uniformly across the surface of the lake, and all the way to the bottom there was no tunnel effect at all. It was not until years after that, in my first reading about NDEs, that I realized the tunnel and the light were a memory of where I could have gone instead of back into my body. Although my NDE seemed perfectly natural to me as a child, I didn't talk about it. And even as my mom converted to Catholicism and put us kids in Catholic Sunday school, I never related my NDE to what they were teaching me about how to get God to love you. When I didn't memorize my catechism lessons perfectly, the nun would whack me on the back of my hand with a wooden ruler. When I fainted in church on a hot summer day, I was hauled out and blamed for disrupting the service. And when I became a teen and no longer wanted to confess my desires to the weird priest in the closet, I began to realize that being Catholic was not my idea of a good time. At Columbia University, I found the teaching of Buddhism breathtaking. And yet, I knew that most Buddhists were wrong about there not being a God, since, after all, I had seen from afar the light of God's love. I became a practicing Quaker, marched against the Vietnam War and in favor of civil rights for blacks. I thought religion might help bring peace and justice to the world. But even my Quaker meeting proved to be intolerant. One Easter Sunday, I was moved to speak of Jesus' sacrifice and to thank him for his teachings about love. I was informed after the meeting that, quote, "This friend's meeting does not appreciate hearing about Jesus during worship." And the human failings of the so-called religious got to me early on as well. One of the first girls I dated confessed to me in tears that at the age of 12, she'd been raped by her Presbyterian choir master. A boy I went to school with was abused by the local Catholic priest. A closeted pedophile pastor who spoke at my ordination later jumped off a bridge after being outed by a same-sex partner. A now Protestant pastor told me over dinner one night how he'd started out as a candidate for the Catholic priesthood, but had to leave the seminary because the predominantly gay seminarians shunned him for being a heterosexual. And when religion makes the news, it rarely reflects the notion that compassion and love are the qualities God seeks in us. It's appalling to see Sunni and Shiite Muslims literally at each other's throats, to see Catholics and Protestants still duking it out, even to see Episcopalians fighting with Anglicans over whether women and gays can be priests and bishops. Oh, and by the way, over who owns that church real estate anyhow. To add fuel, there are the endless debates over the rules of dogma. Who is entitled to receive communion? Who are you allowed to marry? What are you allowed to eat, to wear, to say? What kinds of sex and birth control can you practice? How many wives are you allowed to have, and are you allowed to get divorced? Muslim women are being stoned to death for not following dress codes, for attempting to get an education, or even wanting a say in whom they will marry. In the past, Orthodox Jews born out of wedlock were not permitted to marry, and Catholic suicides couldn't be given a proper burial in a Catholic cemetery. The unwarranted shame and suffering inflicted by religions on their own members has been unlimited and, I would say, unspeakable. The stories of corrupt clergy seem to grow apace. Consider the not insignificant failings of priests, ministers, rabbis, imams, and other religious who have brought down whole congregations with their bad behavior. The people thought their clergy person had been sent by God until he or she was caught stealing from the coffers, molesting an older boy, driving under the influence, or seducing the deacon's wife. When Jesus said he was building his church upon the disciple Peter, he knew the weakness of that cornerstone. Peter exhibited many flaws, including denying Jesus 3 times. We assume Jesus knew what he was doing, however. Peter wasn't perfect, but the light of the Holy Spirit was meant to be Christianity's guide as it formed the congregation. Jesus fulfilled the law and upended it. It's not what you eat, but what you say that can make a person unclean, Jesus told the people. So much for dietary laws. Paul, who'd undergone a near-death experience, proclaimed Gentiles could follow Christ without the painful formality of first being circumcised. In fact, the closer the early church embraced the fundamental teachings of Christ, to love God and love one another, the stronger it became, even in the face of terrible persecutions. Brothers and sisters in Christ took care of one another. They shared everything, matching surplus to need, far better than the communists ever did. But then came the codification of the church by rule and regulation. By the time the Emperor Constantine and the church fathers were through, the Christian church was rebuilt not on love and sharing so much as on a code of rules and a structure of power. Like the Pharisees before them, the church enforced rules concerning diet, dress, and social mores. Many were designed to accrue power to the church, and rules for the people were often designed to benefit the clergy. The structure was hierarchical, with the Pope as king, cardinals and bishops as lords to serve him, and priests to serve their bosses and oversee the people. Priests controlled their congregations through the power to forgive, or not forgive, sin. It is an awesome power to be able to threaten people with eternity in hell. Writings important in Jesus' day, such as the Book of Enoch, were excluded and destroyed, as were many Gnostic writings of the 2nd century, because they did not support the hierarchy. Great minds such as Origen's, who dared to speak of reincarnation, were hushed, or excommunicated, or killed by those who chose what would be included in or excluded from the Bible. In the 1st century, Jews and Romans gave Christians a hard time after Constantine made Christianity the official state religion. After that, Christians began to persecute the Jews. And it's ironic that it was an attempt to show where Judaism and Christianity had gone wrong that resulted in a latecomer to the religious scene, Mohammed, and the rise of convert or die Islam. How do different religions develop? Often they begin with one person, an Abraham, a Paul, or a Mohammed, who has had a mystical experience, a close encounter with a spiritual being or with God. Religions start with the kinds of encounters we talk about here at IANDS this weekend and on my radio show every Monday. Just consider how frequently experiences like NDE meetings with God take place. I'm sure if we didn't understand the commonalities of NDEs, for example, many of the people in this room I'm addressing would have grounds to found one or more new religions. Many of these visions reveal there is only one God, which came as news to generations of early followers. Abraham had encounters with God that led him to monotheism. Jews struggled constantly against pagan gods and blamed idol worship for the loss of the 10 tribes. Christians struggled mightily, and with some success, to describe the concept of Trinity as monotheist. You'd think with that decision resolved, that there's only one God, religions would be of one mind. But no. The car talk guys on public radio have what they call the ANDE scale for smart letters they receive, ANDEs being the best. ANDE, it seems, posited the notion that one man talking about something he doesn't understand actually knows more than 2 people talking about something they don't understand. In other words, the more people involved, the dumber things get. I attribute that as the reason Jesus said, "Where 2 or more are gathered in my name, there I'll be." It seems the more people you get into the discussion, the more you need God to straighten it out. The Prophet Muhammad was born in the year 570 in Mecca, which even before Islam was a principal religious center of Arabia. Pagan Arabs made annual pilgrimages to Mecca to make offerings to Allah, a high deity who had fathered sons and daughters, and to worship at the Kaaba, a black rock some scientists think might have been a meteorite. On his commercial journeys to Syria and Palestine, Muhammad met Jews and Christians and learned something about their religions. It is said Muhammad was a man given to fasting and prayer and was also subject to epileptic seizures. It's not just my theory alone that, given his condition, Muhammad may have had a near-death experience in which he encountered the other side. Whatever the cause, he claimed to have experienced the angel Gabriel and embraced the notion of monotheism. For his preaching and his attacks on paganism, he was driven out of Mecca, but then at Medina he was recognized by the people as the prophet of God. As his followers increased, he conquered several Arabian, Jewish, and Christian tribes, took Mecca in 630, and destroyed the idols of the Kaaba. In 632, he made his last pilgrimage to Mecca with 40,000 followers, and soon after that died in a violent fever at age 63. The rest, as they say, is history. That is to say, a history of religious war. The Catholic Encyclopedia, which is probably not impartial in this matter, says that after Muhammad's death, Mohammedanism aspired to become a world power and a universal religion. Quoting from that encyclopedia, the successors of Muhammad effected the conquest of Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, North Africa, and the south of Spain. The Muslims even crossed the Pyrenees, threatening to stable their horses in St. Peter's and Rome, but were at last defeated by Charles Martel at Tours in 732, only 100 years after the death of Muhammad. In the 8th and 9th centuries, they conquered Persia, Afghanistan, and a large part of India, and in the 12th century, they had already become the absolute masters of all Western Asia, Spain, and North Africa, Sicily, etc. They were finally conquered by the Mongols and Turks in the 13th century, but the new conquerors adopted Muhammad's religion, and in the 15th century overthrew the tottering Byzantine Empire in 1453. From that stronghold, Constantinople, they even threatened the German Empire, but were successfully defeated at the gates of Vienna and driven back across the Danube in 1683. The wars over religion go on and on. The West sent the Crusades into the Middle East to take back the Holy Land. They wound up attacking Christians in Constantinople as well. Today, 4,000 years after Father Abraham raised the knife over his son, Muslims war with Jews. ISIS Sunnis in Iraq kill Christians in war with Shiites in Iraq and Iran. Pakistani Muslims war with Hindu Indians. Secular Chinese attack Tibetan Buddhists and Chinese Christians. Russian Orthodox condemn Russian Protestants. Fundamentalist Taliban destroy women's hopes for fair treatment in Afghanistan, etc., etc. And we have to ask, where is the love of Christ, the compassion of Buddha, the peace of Jerusalem? The great truths of religion have been corrupted by the struggles for power. And because of that, we lost the thread of truth. As just one example, let me mention a moment in theological history that was pointed out by James Bean, a friend of mine who's been on my NDE radio show, and you can check out more of what James has to say if you go back through our archives. To my way of thinking, this disagreement may have set Western religion back to the Old Testament. James wrote, "There is a chapter in the book Disputed Questions by Thomas Merton on how the concept of light mysticism got lost in the Catholic Protestant West, but somehow retained in Orthodoxy. Merton wrote about a major dispute in church history between a scholar by the name of Barlaam and the great light mystic saint Gregory Palamas. It's a fascinating account. Barlaam argued, like some do today, that spiritual experiences are never real, that they are merely, quote, in your head, unquote. St. Gregory, fortunately for spirituality in the Orthodox East, prevailed, and the churches of the East continue to hold the view that we, human beings, even now, while alive in this present life, can see visions of the light of heaven. Visions of light are still okay, like they were during the time of early Christianity on the road to Damascus, on the radiant road to reality. If thine eye be single, Jesus is said to have said, thy body shall be filled with light. James goes on. Russell Perkins, in his book The Stranger of Galilee, comments on this chapter of Merton's Disputed Questions. Quote, unfortunately, the Western Church did not accept the belief of St. Gregory Palamas that divine light could be experienced directly in the present life, which means that most of us with Catholic or Protestant backgrounds do not have this heritage, even though mystics in both Catholic and Protestant traditions have understood it. Certainly John of the Cross, Hildegard, and other Western mystics have reported visions of God's light. Though I agree that most of us growing up in this culture and in the Western churches remain unaware of the possibility of seeing the light of heaven, to my knowledge, it is never taught in the churches. St. Gregory debated the rationalist Barlaam in 1341 in front of hundreds of bishops and monastics at the great church of Hagia Sophia, with its huge mosaic of Jesus looking down, which is in Constantinople, now, of course, Istanbul. Though Gregory won the debate, Barlaam's arguments were embraced by the Western Church, virtually eliminating the possibility that personal mystical experience for all would ever be acknowledged by the Western churches. What a loss. So much for organized religions as the source for truth. But then, what about science as the path to enlightenment? In the 18th century, science seemed like a possible alternative to what was meant to bring humanism and science to the forefront so that truth could overcome holy wars and priestly superstitions. When it was demonstrated that Earth was not the center of the universe and that evolution could serve to explain our existence, then science and religion began their own struggle for power, a struggle that in some ways continues to this day. But in its struggle to prove that religion was nothing more than superstition, science generally refused to consider spiritual questions of any kind, and thus forfeited a great opportunity, that is, to explore the question of what different dimensions open to us when we die. Afraid they were, young Skywalker. Afraid to tackle one of the greatest and most profound questions. They'd been burned, you see, by their enemies in the religious camps, and they were not going to debate questions that held even the slightest flavor of religious speculation. Science demanded verifiable, repeatable results, and if a miracle could not be replicated, the results were never going to be relevant to the scientific mind. Further blocking the road to discovering truth, science got subverted by its financial patrons, by their greed and their desire for power and influence. While alchemists were directed to turn lead into gold, Western physicians had witches. Witches actually could heal people with herbs and faith. They discovered many incredible things long before the West adopted them. Penicillin, for one, and they had these witches burned at the stake. Meanwhile, scientists were turning to developing new and more deadly weapons for their governmental patrons. In other words, science was following the money. Amazing machines to increase production brought on the Industrial Revolution, and the military, industrial, pharmaceutical, entertainment complex we're immersed in today, with all its commercialism and environmental degradation, was the result. Today there's a prescription to quell almost any mystical experience, a doctor to tell you your NDE was just a hallucination, and video games to distract you from meditation, prayer, or even a walk in the woods. So much for science as the highway to truth. It's been more likely a highway robbery of our chances for enlightenment and the preservation of our environment. Just consider science's priorities. For example, last year's discovery of the Higgs boson, the particle God used to materialize the universe, was preceded by almost 8 decades by the invention of the nuclear bomb, the tool by which humans can dematerialize life on Earth. The fact is, this world is a world of ghosts, both living and dead. As I travel from room to room making my hospital rounds as chaplain, I'm encountering spiritual illiteracy and spiritual numbness at stupefyingly high levels. Sci-fi stories of vampires, zombies, and superheroes have replaced notions of learning about God's light and love. So organized religion and establishment science have, to a large extent, both betrayed God. Both claim to be in the pursuit of truth, and yet each offers up the convenient truths that mainly work to keep the powers that be in power. So where is the healing for this world that this talk was supposed to offer? Well, the good news is the Bozos are here to wake the ghosts from their dreaming. I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but first, let me tell you a little about chaplain work. It's both because of and despite all of the above that I really enjoy my work as chaplain. The surprise is nothing shocks me anymore. When teenagers tell me they're vampires who drink one another's blood, when a young father on drugs shakes his baby to death, when the wealthy claim God is on their side against the poor, when a Christian pastor announces he knows the second coming will occur on May 21st, 2011, when third world countries spend their national treasure learning to build weapons of mass destruction, when the Supreme Court decides that corporations are people, etc., etc. Well, I can recognize that I've been at times in my life almost as crazy as these. Few chaplains I know are pillars of virtue, fonts of wisdom, or noted scriptural scholars. What they are humans who have learned how to listen to others and to understand what they hear. No, they don't have to agree with everyone, but they have to participate in forgiveness if they want to help heal. Anyone who has failed at some time in their lives must be willing to hug another failure in their struggle to succeed. Now take a chaplain who has had a near-death experience. And what do you have? One of those bozos I've been talking about, but which another faith might call a bodhisattva. Well, what's a bodhisattva? Someone who has been given a glimpse of eternal truth to share with others. On the Buddhist Tricycle website, Kosho Uchiyama writes, in part, a bodhisattva is an ordinary person who takes up a course in his or her life that moves in the direction of Buddha. You're a bodhisattva. I'm a bodhisattva. Actually, anyone who directs their attention, their life, to practicing the way of life of a Buddha is a bodhisattva. Most people live by their desires or karma. We are born into this world with our desires and may live our lives just by reacting or responding to them. In contrast is a bodhisattva who lives by vow. The life that flows through each of us and through everything around us is actually all connected. To say that, of course, means that who I really am cannot be separated from all the things that surround me. Or to put it another way, all sentient beings have their existence and live within my life. So needless to say, that includes even the fate of all mankind. That too lies within me. Therefore, just how mankind might truly live out its life becomes what I aim at as my direction. This aiming, or living, while moving in a certain direction, is what is meant by vow. Just that, nothing more. In other words, it is the motivation for living that is different for a bodhisattva. Ordinary people live thinking only about their own personal, narrow circumstances connected with their desires. In contrast to that, a bodhisattva, though undeniably still an ordinary human being like everyone else, lives by vow. Because of that, the significance of his or her life is not the same. For us, as bodhisattvas, all aspects of life, including the fate of humanity itself, live within us. It is with this in mind that we work to discover and manifest the most vital and alive posture that we can in living out our life. End of quote. For Mahayana Buddhists, life in this world is compared to people living in a house that is on fire. People live out their desires, not recognizing the house, this world, is on fire and will soon burn down. A bodhisattva is one who has a determination to free sentient beings from samsara and its cycle of death, rebirth, and suffering. In other words, we are the shepherd-like bodhisattvas, and there are many different types. I think 4 primary types of bodhisattvas, but the shepherds are the ones who delay going into the light until all other sentient beings achieve the light as well. That's what makes us the Bozos, who keep coming back lifetime after lifetime, leaving the light to bring light to others. And anyone who has seen the other side in some form of mystical experience during this lifetime has received a gold-plated invitation to join the club. Whether you call it Bozo, Bodhisattva, or Chaplain, that's the calling we must be following now. And I'll pause for a minute just to mention that it's been estimated there are some 15 million living NDE, near-death experiencers in this country alone. When you consider how great a number that is, if people would just turn to each other and say, you know, I've never told anyone this before, but this is what happened to me, and this is how I saw the other side, and I know for a fact that this is true. What a difference that would make to the world. 15 million bodhisattvas out there could change the world. As a chaplain, I find there's nothing more healing in our bag of tools than the sharing of NDE stories. In a world at war with itself, there is nothing more peacemaking than the knowledge that the light of God's love is freely available to all, regardless of race, gender, or religion. If you have been given the gift of an NDE, an out-of-body experience, or any other encounter with the other side, share it with others. It's why we ran away to join the circus we call Earth, in the first place. The Pistis Sophia quotes Jesus as saying, "Do not cease seeking day or night, and do not rest until you find the mysteries of the kingdom of the light, which will purify you and make you into pure light and take you into the kingdom of light." That's Pistis Sophia, Faith Wisdom, and it's a book published by E.J. Brill. Kirpal Singh wrote, "The light of life is in you. Indeed, you live by that very light, whether you realize it or not. Each one of you has had an experience of that holy light. Now you must live in constant contact with the holy light. It is uncreated and shadowless, eternally the same and peerless. The whole creation came into being by the same light, and that very light is shining in every heart." The light of life must be made manifest in existence. Be ye a witness to the light of life, not only within yourself, but in others as well. For the same light shineth everywhere, and there is no place where it is not. Once you discover this light and learn to live by it, your whole existence will be changed. Love will permeate your very being and will burst forth from the very pores of your body, transmuting all dross into sterling gold. Kirpal Singh. So at my talk, I made the sign of the cross and said, Domini, 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 you are all chaplains now. But not necessarily Christian chaplains, just chaplains. Because we have been seated here to seed truth. And then I thanked the audience in advance for lightening the lives of others. But I reminded them, just remember, this house is on fire. This house, our bodies, our civilization, and we will soon be consumed. This life, of all the lives that we've been reincarnated into, this life is no time to be wasting time. And then I ended with St. Francis' prayer of peace, but it's not St. Francis. was attributed to St. Francis, but first appeared in a little French magazine called Little Bell in 1912. It was a favorite prayer of Mother Teresa, however, who was certainly a very wise and wonderful bodhisattva. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me seed love. Where there is injury, let me seed pardon. Where there is discord, let me seed harmony. Where there is error, let me seed truth. Where there is doubt, let me seed faith. Where there is despair, let me seed hope. Where there is darkness, let me seed light. And where there is sadness, let me seed joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, seek to be understood as to understand, seek to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. And that's where my little talk ended. Well, thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear this show again or any of our more than 500 archived ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. And be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone, for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying once again, thanks for listening.